Massive trigger warning: in today's video we'll be talking about self-harm, abuse, addiction, depression and other sensitive subjects. So if you need to take a moment, please do, and always remember your mental health is more important.
Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Wildflowers Reality, and today I'm extremely honored to be hosting a safe space for my dear friend Josh. Y'all may know him better as the Josh C Show, as he gives us a deeper look into his own walk of life and some of the things that he has endured within. If you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to leave those in the comments down below, but most importantly, shower him with all the love and support in the world. And with that being said, take it away, Josh.
You know, I've been on YouTube for a while, and I suppose I could start there, like why I do YouTube. I've been a watcher of YouTube for not for years, because I've been watching a lot of commentary channels even back then. Things were so much different back then in 2016, I think it was, when I started watching a lot of makeup, and I actually started doing videos about commentary and stuff like that, because I found it fascinating. Just like the different dramas that happen everywhere.
Even the dramas then just didn't seem as heavy or serious or personal. And it's definitely hit this more aggressive place in the last couple of years. Is that because of the pandemic and things? I've heard a lot of people kind of take that route. Or do you think it's kind of always been that way? And maybe you and I, when we first started out, just wasn't aware of it because we were very new and we weren't in those types of communities where things like that happened at that point.
So the pandemic really did hit a lot of people, like, mentally. So I think that's probably why a lot of it has gotten a bit worse over the past, well, 3 years. I think the drama has always been there. It's always been there, but it was not so noticeable.
So when you came onto the scene and decided that you were going to make your channel, were you already a part of the community, or did that come after you became a creator?
Actually, it was because of Twitter is how I found into the anti-KJ community. I seen some stuff about autism, that the KJ was giving this information out, and I had my say on Twitter, and then it developed into, I took it to my YouTube channel, should I say. That's how I got into the anti-KJ community, and then obviously, you know, that all the communities are merging into one these days. The reason why I wanted to do YouTube to begin with was because it was sort of like a hobby and a passion for me, because I can't, well, it's not that I can't leave the house, it's because of all the medical conditions, which I have a lot of. I don't leave the house very often, so YouTube is my escape.
I know you have talked about the fact that you're autistic and that you were in a car accident when you were younger. But do you mind divulging a bit more on your medical conditions?
The road accident happened when I was a child, and it's pretty much the very first big medical issue I had, and it was a major brain injury. I completely smashed the left side of my head, and it was very lucky that I don't remember anything before, or sorry, I shouldn't say that. I remember very little bits here and there. I was very accident prone, so this is my mother's retelling me, you know, all these things. I had broken my wrist a few months prior, took the cast off, and then had the road accident literally within a matter of weeks. So just healed from breaking my wrist, and then had a major brain injury. I don't, as I say, don't remember much before that. And when I came out, I was in a coma for 6 weeks. Came out of the coma like a newborn baby. From what I've been told, the doctor's prognosis when I was in the coma was I'd always be that way. They said I would be like a vegetable. And so that's not the actual medical term, but
Well, they got that wrong, didn't they?
they did. They did. Along with that, I had traits of autism before the road accident, my mum says. But when I had the road accident, it brought it pretty much to the forefront. So I was diagnosed with autism, I think at 10. Growing up with autism can be difficult because you're seen as different. I didn't learn about how autism affects me until I was in my adult life anyway. So growing up with a medical condition like autism and a brain injury, it was a fun time for medical professionals, that's for sure. The autism wasn't really detrimental. The brain injury, on the other hand, was to a degree because I developed a lot of mental health issues. It's like the keloid scarring I have is because of the brain injury, because I never had it before. And I discovered that at a very young age as well. But keloid scarring is excessive scar tissue where the skin doesn't heal. I've got them all. I've got them on my shoulders, my elbows, my wrists, my chest, and my back. I mean, I've been in and out of hospitals for surgeries for these different things. I've had ones removed. I've had steroid injections years ago. What they're called, steroid strips. And they've tried everything to get rid of them, and they can't. So it's just something I have to live with, and that's the reason why I'm on gabapentin. I've always been in pain, whether that's how I've got a constant headache, it's the keloid scars. Like it's always something I've always known.
As a young person, teenager, child, what were those first symptoms that you recall struggling with mentally?
Major anxiety. I was put on antidepressants 7 years ago. But I've always known that I suffered from depression. My school years were fun because I suffered with a lot of mentally, like as I say, anxiety, concentration issues. I think you use the word self-loathing. It's hard to describe because it's all encompassing in one. Having to grow up again, I was always behind everybody else, like mentally, maturity-wise, everything. So I was always in this constant state of anxiety, not feeling good enough, not being able to be good enough because of those things. And then my mom was very open and honest about saying, you have autism.
Yeah.
My mum went into the healthcare profession because of my road accident as well. So to understand me more and understand me better. Because of the brain injury, I went through puberty really early, like from the age of 10. You can imagine this. Technically, mentally, I'm 2. My body is 10, but I've hit puberty before everybody else. So it definitely was a concoction of a lot of emotions, a lot of hormones, a lot was going on. I used to have a lot of night terrors, which were not pleasant.
Were your night terrors realistic things, or was it like just like fantasy, like nightmare type things that were unrealistic, or do you remember?
Both. It was a bit of both.
Okay.
Another fun fact is went through a lot of tests back then, a lot of mental health tests. They gave me the diagnosis of autism, but they was also checking for a lot of other things as well. And they were checking me for a lot of mental health diagnoses.
You can't target one thing and say, oh, well, it's
No.
all this, when there are multiple different things going on. So I can
Yeah.
imagine you went through a shit ton of tests,
Yeah. Autism, although, yes, there was information out there about the condition and stuff like that. It wasn't really well researched. I knew I have always known I have had autism, but I didn't understand how it affects me.
When I was growing up, you didn't hear about it often. And if someone was autistic, it wasn't public knowledge a lot.
I used to see a therapist every other week as a kid to help me in live everyday life. A lot of my processing is slower than the average person, which apparently I've been told on YouTube is a benefit because some people will be talking and then I'll bring up something that was said 5-10 minutes ago. It's like, oh, that's a different perspective. I'm like, oh, okay.
And I think also just processing things and that being a bit delayed, I think a lot of times, if it takes you a month to really process it all, then you've had that whole month to not only be processing what's happening, but to see what continues to happen. So you just have a better understanding before you even ever speak on it,
Yeah, it's a good thing. I think depends on the circumstances though, because some people want a reaction, and I don't normally react straight away.
Yeah.
I've been told I can come across cold. I have been put in emotional situations. I freeze. I can come across cold to people, but that's because I haven't processed what's going on.
Well, and also just being honest, it's like I think the internet as a whole, especially like a lot of these community related situations that happen, they can it's very easy for them to turn you a bit cold and hardened to things because
Yeah, kind of.
it's a challenge to not be and to not let it make you that way, because there's a lot of
Yeah,
ruthless people out here and a lot of people who will do whatever to bring a person down. So it's hard
true.
it's a challenge to not let yourself match energy and be that same way. Was there a certain age where things really started changing for you, or in a negative direction?
I suppose 12, a lot happened in that year. My nan passed away from alcoholism, although I didn't know the alcoholism part until I was a lot older. That was the very first time I'd said or felt a big loss and not really understood it. Like me mentally, I wasn't 12. I keep on having to say that because it, I wasn't able to process. I remember I have some memories, one or two, but not that many. I also missed a year of school. America does things differently here to the UK, but we have it's elementary, junior school, and then secondary school, and then either sixth form or college, and then university. I think that's how it goes. I was in year 5 at the time. What happened was I was a kid who constantly lost his glasses, constantly took them off, didn't want to keep them on my face. They irritated me, all that kind of thing. So I was constantly losing my glasses. And one time at school, I lost them at school. Um, and my mum took me in the day after, and the she saw the glasses on the table because obviously the teacher had found them. Um, she pointed them out, and the teacher's response was, "I bet you if you gave him 50p, he'd find them." So my mum wasn't very impressed. She took me out of. I had a school day that day and then left afterwards. Finding a school after that was difficult because of all the issues I had, and that's the reason I missed a year because of all like it was very difficult to find a school that would house my specific special needs. So I was a latecomer. was in special needs. The special needs unit is what they called it. And boy, did that paint a target on your back. I mean, school wasn't all bad, but it wasn't exactly brilliant. You got bullied a lot because you were different. I mean, this is the reason why I look at my school and I'm like, well, nothing really changes as you become an adult now, does it? It's just more, they're a bit more vicious when they're adults. Although, to be fair, I think kids can be quite vicious too. I feel for kids who are bullied these days because we got up light because we didn't have social media. So school was certainly interesting. I went to work placement at the age of 16. This is what they do here in the UK. Like you send them to school, you send them on the work placement to get them ready for the work. So I went to a nursing home that was very close to me. It was only a 2-week placement, but I met a young, well, she was, at the time, she was younger than what I am now, but I was 16. I met a young lady named Danielle. She was the only young person in this nursing home, so everyone kind of felt bad for her. She was in a wheelchair and stuff like that. And that's the reason why she was in the nursing home. Did my placement, and then because we could become friendly, I used to go and visit her. One evening, Danny wanted to watch the film Train Spotting. It's not good if you are in addiction or in recovery. It's one of those films and where there's a lot of drug use on display. Yeah. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but Danielle used to be an addict. Watching this film triggered something in her. She became an addict again. With my help, that sent me down a little bit of a dangerous path. I used to be one of these people where I don't start off light on anything. It's either I'm going to go all in and go to the extreme, or not at all.
Yeah. So with Danielle, what was her? If you don't mind, again, if you don't feel like you don't have to share if you don't want to share, but was it a specific substance that she was addicted to?
Yes, it was heroin.
Before this Danielle girl, was you even aware of what heroin was?
No. We hung about and did that for a little bit. It was a couple of weeks. It wasn't just heroin either. We did cocaine as well. The reason why it got all found out was because you know how cocaine is an upper. I had done some of that and then stayed up all night cleaning my bedroom at the time, and then went to school. And then the downer came out, like whilst I was at school, kind of threatened to punch someone's lights out. Then almost did it too.
Oh wow!
So the school obviously found out and was alerted. Wasn't allowed to go out anywhere for 2 weeks. I mean, the only places I really went was to the shop and to school. What's ironic is I came clean, 2 weeks had passed, and then I went back to school on something which is called a PSH day, which is just basically topical stuff. It's not your usual schooling. It's like you do sports, you do different things. Went back to that school, and then one of the things they were teaching was the side effects of drugs. I was like, thank you, universe. Are you trying to tell me something? What I was learning was how it actually feels to go through, like, I was only on the small withdrawal because I wasn't taking it that long. But man, does it mess with your body and your senses and your mind. But that wasn't a fun 2 weeks because technically I was a minor and an adult supplied me with drugs. I did video testimony against her because I believe the nursing home pressed charges because drugs were on their campus. Did that video deposition and then found out a couple of weeks later that Danielle had overdosed. I carried around a lot of guilt because I felt like it was my fault back then. I don't now. but I did back then because it's like she'd never met me, then she wouldn't have, that's where my mind went. I was 16, I was a kid. That's not the only time that I've done drugs, by the way, but that was the first time. I said that 12 was the pivotal year that was very dark. And I say, I mentioned about uh, my nan passing, but a lot of other factors were there as well. I can't remember if I said it was the first time that we discovered I had keloid scarring as well. Also, around the same time, I went through emotional and physical abuse from lovely pillar of the community, my stepfather. And this is where a lot of my negative self-loathing comes from. I was always told and always made to feel like I was never good enough. Nothing was ever good enough. And quite often was told, I will never amount to anything and never will be anything. My mum and my dad are their first true love. So I think there was a lot of jealousy, and I was the product of their relationship. So I should have said this at the beginning, but the reason why I'm telling my story is because I want people to know, I'm 34 now, and it's pretty dark what we've been through so far. I also want people to understand why some people want to numb pain. I was pretty much a sheltered child, a sheltered teenager, because I just went to school or, to the local shop because my mum was very protective because of what happened with the road accident. We came to blows a few times because I was like, I felt I was old enough and ready enough to go out into the world, but I wasn't allowed to. I would time say my mum and my that is what I should have said, aren't together anymore at all. My mum didn't find out any of this until years later. I kept it all in until I was 18, around about that time, and went to see a family friend. Well, thought was a family friend, and because my stepdad was the pillar of the community, he was a good Christian man. No one believed me. I was called a liar. So,
because of his religious standing and his, the way he was perceived, do you think that played any part in why you had issues with religion?
yeah, I would say so, a little bit, but that's also because I've witnessed a lot, as an adult.
I know you're not a religious person, so I
No,
was just
no.
curious if that played a part in as to
I
maybe the beginning stages of why, because this person was supposed to be this great person, so
yeah.
religious, but yet they were doing those things behind closed doors.
It's a question of do you believe in faith or not? And it's it's not the faith that's the issue; it's the
Yeah.
person that's the issue.
Some people, like Katie Joy,
Yeah.
for instance, perfect example, she really does try to throw it down people's throat that
Mm.
God isn't a thing and this isn't a thing and that's not a thing and you guys are wrong. And it's
But,
like you can have your beliefs, but you can't push that down anyone else's
right.
throat. And that's where I have an issue with religion, because
Yeah.
a lot of times, no matter the branch of religion, that's what happens. They try to push
Mm.
that down people's
But,
throats. I just wanted to ask, you
yeah,
mentioned he had this religious standing and was known as this good religious man. So I was just curious
yeah,
if that did play a part in maybe why you in the beginning had issues with religion.
yeah, it did. Being the rebellious teenager that I was, me and my mum came to blows. Can't remember what age it was, to be honest, but she was like, okay, you can do what you want now. And I did. Went out partying to the clubs and did that for many years and did many different substances. in that time. Got myself in some very interesting situations. This is like from going on from my late teens to sort of mid 20s. I think a lot of people, such as myself and others that I've spoken to throughout the years, when they've been through something like this, a lot of the time where you're looking for love, but you don't know what the ideal love is. I went through a very dangerous stage because I thought the only way anyone would pay any attention to me was through physical means. That comes from a lack of self-worth.
I will say I find that interesting because I didn't know that, you know, well, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but there's that stereotype that girls with daddy issues is what kind of goes through that. But to hear from a man's perspective, it's possible for a man to also go through that and to feel that way, because I very much felt that way, and went through a very similar stage as well, where physical means meant that that person loved you, or that was love. That's like, you know what I mean? If someone was going to be physical with you, that's love. Oh, they must care about you. You must be special to them. So then you kind of get that notion in your head that that's what you have to do in order to be loved or cared about.
Yeah, guys go through it too. The way society views how men should act. I was always told as a teenager and even as an adult, you should be seen and not heard, and things like that, and men shouldn't show feelings. It's interesting because it's like, I think a lot of the time, was for me anyway, I was always felt like I was told to be quiet and couldn't express how I feel, and that messes you up. That messes you up even without all the lovely issues I have. When it comes to women's societal issues, it's more spoken about. I think that's why. Whereas men, because we are told to keep quiet, it's people don't really know about it unless we say it.
Right. And unfortunately, I think throughout the years, men have kind of fell in line with that. So there hasn't, up until like the recent generations, right? Men didn't speak out often. It was a silent thing they kind of fought with internally.
There's something I want to say. I'm going to say it. I was messed up mentally. And I see it across YouTube, by the way. This is the reason I'm bringing it up. I felt like a victim of all those situations. And I felt like the world owed me something. But as I've gotten a little bit older and a little bit wiser, do not judge me this weekend. I'm no longer a victim of those circumstances. So I'm a survivor of a lot of this stuff. All of us are survivors out here, you know? I feel like I'm preaching more than telling my story now.
That's the whole point, right? Like that's the whole point, and why I want to help people share their stories, because I want people to be able to be like, okay, this is what I learned. Or if I could say one thing to someone else, this is what I would say, that may be going through these similar things.
That's the reason why I wanted to do this, because I do want to talk about, like, I became a sex addict because I didn't feel love. I didn't feel like I could be loved. As I've said, I had become a drug addict as well. You know, a lot of things people find hard to admit, especially the sex addict one.
So diving into the sex addict part a bit, I know you said that it kind of started from your perception of physical means being love, being affection. You tied those together. That's how it kind of started. When did you realize that it had turned into an addiction?
When I slept with 3 guys in 2 nights. I had to do a lot of internal work on that, because I had to realize that it's not about whether they're going to like me, it's whether I like myself first.
From your personal perspective, do you feel like that was another way your addiction with intimacy and sexual encounters, was that also another way for you to deal with like numbing the things you was going through?
It was, because it releases like hormones and things like that when you're having sex. I felt miserable all the time, so I felt like I was always chasing that high in a way.
What age did you know, if you don't mind me asking, that you were gay? Did you always know that?
No. So came out at I came out twice to my mum. I think it was 16. Um, and then went back into the closet and came out a year later again because I wasn't exposed to any LGBT content at all. So I didn't know what it was. I did know a little bit, but didn't know fully and didn't understand it fully. I almost became a dad twice. I went out with a girl. I went out with two or three girls actually, but like within like a 2 year span, got my girlfriend at the time pregnant and she miscarried. And a few months later, it happened again. And then what's interesting about that is, I think a few months later after that, I came out. On the one hand, I'm glad, and that's horrible to say. But I was like young at the time, like me mentally right now, and mentally back then either. I don't think I was ready for a kid. I don't think anyone's ready for a kid, but it was a lot. Even now, there are some things where I'm like, why was I like that? But I think because I've spent so many years in seclusion, so to speak, I've had a lot of time to think. I'm right.
You stopped everything
Yeah,
on your own,
yeah.
which is
And then,
incredible. And you kind of
but
isolated yourself back into your little safe haven,
yeah,
your home or
yeah.
wherever. Okay.
And I think what I want people to know about that is, and I think you've said it too, and then like an addictive personality. Addictive
Yes,
personality.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I could become addicted
So
to anything.
yeah, yeah. Like, but that's it though. Here's the thing: when I know, don't get me wrong, there is recovery. It's so easy to become addicted to something. Like I'm addicted to coffee, and it's like my addictions over the years have changed. It's no longer having a sex addiction or a drug addiction. And you know what? Another thing is what I've noticed a lot since the pandemic is a lot of people have become addicted to social media.
Oh yeah, me too. I've had to pull myself away many a times, and it's something I have to keep in check constantly. And
Yeah,
as a creator, that can be really hard because it's all about
yeah, yeah,
consistency and it's all about this and that. But when
yeah,
you see yourself in a negative cycle and it's somewhat of like a mental relapse because of social media, you have to be able to step back, even if that means once a month. If that's what you got to do, you got to do it. But it is hard as a creator because you're told you need to be consistent, you need to be posting, you need to be on social media. And in what we do, which is a choice, commentary is a choice, but in what we do, it is circulated around what's going on social media, what's going on here, what's going on there. And when you
yeah,
have an addictive personality, it's very easy to get emotionally invested in all these little things. And keeping that in
yeah.
check can be hard sometimes.
It can. Like when I'm reviewing a topic or reviewing a subject, I know when things get too much for me, is when I'll start getting angry at the person. Well, not the circumstance, but the individual.
I'm the same way. When I start feeling like I can't even watch someone's video without being like, you're a liar. You're lying about everything. You're awful. You're
Right?
disgusting. You know what I mean? When those are the thoughts going through my head, it's like, I don't need to watch this person anymore. And it's something I have to keep in check because I don't hate anyone online. But that is
No.
real.
No.
When you see someone doing a bunch of problematic things, it's going to annoy you. It's going to frustrate
Yeah,
you. And everyone's different. But for me personally, I can step back for a few days,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
recenter myself and come back to reality of like, I don't know this person. I can't hate, I don't dislike this person. I just dislike the behavior.
That was another thing I really wanted to touch on. Anger control. I suppose I have to do it because of the seizures I have. That's the reason why I have to keep as calm as I can because my seizures aren't epilepsy, they're more stress. And that's the reason why I'm so glad you allowed me on your channel, because I would have got myself into a panic and everything like that. And that's what happens a lot of the time. Watching all the dramas, like all the dramas that we've seen around lately,
Yeah.
it gets too much for me. I'll be honest. I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform on YouTube, to keep up with everything. And that can cause, and that's his thing, that's my own issues that I've always had about putting pressure on myself. Right. You are putting pressure on yourself, not other people are putting pressure on you. That's what I have to keep in my mind, because as I say, I can get myself pretty worked up.
Would you say whenever you come to this realization that you are struggling with all of these different things, substances, sex, all these things, and you kind of transfer it back into solitude and being a homebody, around what age would you say that was?
I was in, I believe, my early 20s.
I'm assuming, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming a lot of that was because of things you hadn't dealt with, like traumas and different things.
Yeah.
You hadn't even been processed.
It hadn't been processed, like why?
And I mean, like you said, you already have that delay in process. I couldn't imagine, like, you're going through all of this and don't even know why. I know how that feels to an extent, but I couldn't imagine not really knowing, because I knew. I was just kind of running from the reasons, right? Did you have an opportunity or a point in your life where you did start kind of working through those things?
For me, it was in my mid-20s. I had spent a lot of time there, a lot of time reflecting, thinking. I knew why my response is that way. But I was still angry at the world. I channeled that into trying to help others, which sounds very soppy when I say it out loud. First, I went to discover how autism affects me. I knew I was autistic, I knew my traits, I knew my quirks, as they say, but I didn't know what autism was as a whole. I went and learned all about that, and then after that, I stayed around and volunteered at this centre for a bit, and joined the St. John ambulance as well, just so that I could channel the anger, the very literal pain into something. I finally came to the realization that I can be angry at the world and at myself and at other people, or I could live my life.
You and your partner, y'all have been together for quite a few years. I know you don't talk about him much, but did that also change kind of things once you met him?
I was in a previous relationship before, and it wasn't a good one. Then I started going out with my current partner, and he taught me a lot of where my toxic traits are in a relationship. He helps me out a lot with even just understanding things.
That's cool that he's honest with you, and he also knows where you struggle. Like, he knows you struggle with processing things. He knows that you struggle with navigating through stuff. So to have someone be honest with you and be like, okay, I know how you are. I accept you for who you are, but also here are the things I noticed, that's life changing. I know my husband, same thing. Like, he accepts me good and bad, but also he knows I want to be better.
I can drive myself to that point where I feel like I'm a burden to everybody. And that's a constant feeling that goes back to the emotional abuse. That can have a really dangerous effect on my mental health, because I can work myself up into believing it.
I know I'm a good mom. I know I'm a good wife. I know I'm a good daughter. But when I'm not okay mentally, that's the first thing I'll tell myself is I could be better I could be better. I'm just a burden. I'm just an issue. They'd be better off if they didn't have to
Yeah.
worry about me, or if I wasn't here to be a burden, if they didn't have to take me there or take me there, you know what I mean? So I understand
I
it.
know this. It's not easy. I mean, you think that you work yourself up that you are the problem, but you know in the back of your
Right.
mind you're not. But your
Yeah.
mind is telling you that you are.
And I think the only thing that really helps me is, again, surrounding myself around positive people who remind me that's
Yeah.
not true.
Yeah,
When it
it
comes to
is.
self-harm and self-harming thoughts,
Hmm.
the closest for me that I ever got to like self-harming was my addiction. There were a few isolated incidents of self-harm when I was younger, but it wasn't at like when I was a teenager and I
Yeah.
was rebelling and at my angriest, but it wasn't something that carried on through life. My addiction was more so my self-harming thing. I know you went through that as well. That's another thing you can become addicted to is harming yourself.
You know, I would self harm, but I didn't know why. Um, and then someone explained it to me. Your psychological emotions get too high, and you feel like a physical pain will release that. You know what I'll do now? I have a tendency that if I'm ever really, really stressed, I will have a tendency to squeeze my thumb.
People can be really judgmental of like, how could you, or why could you, or why would you? But if you've never felt that type of internal, constant, endless pain, you can't judge. You just can't. Unless you've been there, you just, you just can't understand it. But
Yeah.
it is crazy how we can, people in general, once you're in that really dark place in your life where those types of things, it can bring you some sort of comfort. It's very dangerous and very much scary.
Yeah.
And not safe at all. And that's why it's important if you're in that place. I'm gonna leave a lot of resources too on this video.
I wanted to do this because I want people to know that you're not alone. We all deal with things differently, and we're all going through things differently. A great thing for me as well is writing. I love to write. So poetry or something like that. Having a journal is good. This is just tips that I've done. Teaching yourself how to ground yourself if you're in a panic situation is another good one as well. And if you are feeling suicidal, the thing that helps me a lot of the time as well, I need to feel something, certain texture or just running water along the hand, just so that I can feel something. I want people to know that I didn't want to do this to trigger anybody. I know I touched on some dark moments, but also like there are strategies that you can do to help.
We live in an era now where it's more acceptable to speak out and to share, but there's a lot of stigmas around it. You being so vulnerable, but at the same time not wanting to trigger people, like I get that. And I think that can hold us back a lot of times because we don't want to harm people with what we're putting out there, but it needs to be talked about. To any guys that may run across this and watch this, or anybody, your feelings are valid. It doesn't have to make sense to someone else or even be a legitimate reason for someone else. If you feel a certain type of way, or if you're going through something, that matters and is valid, and you should be able to vocalize yourself and not feel shameful for it or feel you're a problem or, oh, you should toughen up. And I hate that stigma really bad, especially around men. I'm also going to link a really good video from Dax. I made Josh listen to it. It's called To Be a Man. I recommend everyone in the world to listen to it because it's very real, and it brought a lot of perspectives to me when it comes to what men go through. You don't have to suffer in silence. If you're telling yourself that, because I know I told myself that for years, and that's why I did suffer in silence, just know that that's your mind playing tricks on you.